So I will say a few words and on what we can do with more symbolic and structural approaches. And the main application domain that will illustrate the talk will be image understanding and mostly medical imaging, but not only. So what is image understanding? What is surprising is that there are many definitions that have been given over the last few years on what is image understanding, and the point of view changed quite a lot. And surprisingly, several years ago, so in the 60s, there was a lot of emphasis on the way humans think about images, and the emphasis was really on formal description of the image content and in linguistic terms. And then things changed, and it was just recognition of some objects in images, and which is really close to the low-level information of images. And this idea of providing a description of the image content in terms not only of object, but also the spatial arrangement of the different objects, and all this described in linguistic terms, it disappeared progressively, and now it starts to appear again. So that's surprising to see all these waves of changes in the way we think about image understanding. So I won't detail all the approaches here, but it's just to give you an idea. And here, what I will be talking about is trying to go beyond just object recognition, and really try to infer some knowledge about how or use knowledge on about how are the object arranged in a scene, and then in the image, to provide a global scene interpretation, and again as close as possible as to the human interpretation. And one of the main problems will be to how to extract semantics, so not only on objects again, but really also on spatial relations and whatever. And so try to make some inference about this using higher level reasoning tools. And of course, in case of dynamic sense, so I don't have much example on that, but we will have to add the time information. Okay. And so a few examples to start with. So there has been a lot of work on image annotation. So this is one example of annotation, so that you all well know, I guess. And so this is typically the type of question we have to answer. So it's not just anecdotic to show this. And another example where annotations can be improved by using spatial relations between different objects in the scene. And for instance, here on this on the image on the left, interpreting the regions that have been segmented on the right may be more correct if you use some knowledge about how these types of regions are organized in space. So, for instance, it is clear that the sky, for instance, it cannot be below the trees, for instance. And using these types of relation helps a lot in order to improve the annotation and makes it more spatially consistent. Another problem we have to deal with is the problem of polysemy. So, for instance, if you think of Venus, for instance, what does it mean? And you can have different images representing what is Venus, with, of course, very different meanings. So that's also a problem we will have to deal with. And an example using deep learning, but not only deep learning, is a famous show and tell approach that was presented, was introduced a few years ago. And the idea is to start with an image and try to train neural networks, but also use rules from language in order to derive description of the image as a set of sentences describing the content of the image. And so this is an example here describing a market scene, and the output on the right outputs a few sentences describing the content of the image. So this requires learning from data, but also rules from language. Now, one question we may ask is everything in the data? So that's a current paradigm we can hear very often, that now there are a lot of data and that we can find any knowledge we want in the data. And actually, I think it's an open question, because of course there are some impressive results and very powerful methods now with progress in the number of data we have, the accessibility to data, the annotations of the data, also progress in computer resources, in algorithms, for instance, for optimization, etc. So there are a lot of progress that makes these methods very powerful. But still, it might be very costly to annotate data. And in some domain, data are not so numerous. So think, for instance, about on medical images for rare pathologies, for instance. In such cases, we don't have so many data. Having access to this data is difficult because of confidentiality and so on. And annotation is also costly and requires the help of specialists of this very particular disease. So this is not always so obvious to have many data. Of course, there are some transfer learning approaches that can help solving the problem, but still it can be an open question. And on the other hand, in many domains, we may have knowledge. So typically, the medical domain is a good example where we have a lot of knowledge, and we can think of using this knowledge and integrating it in the image understanding methods. And that will be the focus of my talk, to see how we can use this knowledge and basically how to model this knowledge. So what we need for image understanding is typically models to represent the knowledge we have. So knowledge can be about the context, about the type of images. So for instance, the physical characteristics of the image, the type of noise we may have in the image, the geometry of the acquisition, etc. So there may be a lot of knowledge about the way images are acquired. And we may also have knowledge about the domain. So for instance, if we take again the medical example, we may have a description of the anatomical structures, on how they are organized in the body, etc. And all this knowledge can be helpful to interpret images. And then we will have to combine all these pieces of knowledge, and also to combine it with the information extracted from the images, of course, so with the data. And one of the problems we will have then to solve is what is called the semantic gap. So how to associate a description in linguistic terms or in symbolic terms with features extracted from data. So for instance, if we want to recognize a sick person because he has a red face, for instance, what does it mean red? So we can have a picture of the person, and we have to check whether his face is red or not. And of course, the meaning of red is not the same if we speak of a red face, or if we speak of a red book, for instance, as Chloe's papers, for instance. So it's not the same meaning of red, of course. So that's the type of problem we have to solve with this semantic gap issue. Then once we have represented the knowledge in a given formalism, then we can start reasoning on them and rely on the models in order to interpret the data. And of course, we will have to deal also with unexpected cases, such as pathologies, for instance, taking again the medical example. Okay, so these are a few examples of what we have done in our team on medical image understanding. And for each example, we used models of different types. The first example I will try to use this. I don't know if I will succeed. Maybe this. Yes. So the first example here, it's ultrasound images of of a fetus, and here we have a segmentation of the image into several objects. And in order to achieve this segmentation in a reliable way and in a way that is reproducible among different types of images, different types of acquisition device, we rely on a model of the noise in these images. So we have specific statistical models driving the segmentation. In the second example here, so it's a corpus callosum in an MRI brain image. So this is a white matter structure joining the two hemispheres, so a very important one. And here the model we had is a geometrical model of the approximate shape of these structures. And again, it should be approximate because there is a variability among persons, and we cannot have a very precise shape describing the structure. Here, in this example, we have segmented several structures here in the abdomen in a high resolution CT, and we have here a 3D representation, and here the contours in one slide of the images. And what was used here is some features that are automatically learned from the images, and also spatial information given by anatomical constraints. And this helps segmenting jointly several structures. And here on the right, it's an example where we track vessels in around the heart, again in high resolution CT. And here we used models about the appearance of the objects in the image, and again geometrical models of the shape of the vessel. So these coronary vessels here, they are thin elongated shapes with branchings, and this is used explicitly in order to track the vessel in the image. And there are many such examples. This is an example here of a model extracted from children images to have a model of the pelvis area. Here a model of the fetus in a pregnant woman. So that's for these images, it's like the reverse. So we use anatomical knowledge in order to interpret images and extract some anatomical structures. And from the results, then we can build a digital model of the patient. So like a digital twin of the patient, which is useful for surgery, for instance, and so on. And in the last example here on the bottom, these are white matter fiber bundles extracted from the head again. And here the question was how to model this huge number of fibers using multi-level models, so a kind of hierarchy between different types of representation, using again specific geometric models. So these are just a few examples to show the interest of using models. So what we want to do basically is this. So we have some knowledge, so that can be extracted from images, from ontologies, from textbooks, for instance, etc. And we try to have a formal representation of this knowledge. And I will speak mostly about structural representation, so graphs, ontologies, grammars, etc. So we can have different types of formal structural representation. And then when we want to interpret new data, we have to combine this knowledge representation with the data in a reasoning process in order to make a decision. So for instance, segmentation, recognition of structures, global interpretation of the scene. So the decision can be at different levels. So that's what we want to do. And this field can be seen as a part of a spatial reasoning process, which is the domain of representing knowledge about spatial entities and relationship between these entities and reasoning on them. So most of the work in AI use spatial logics to do that. And when we want to use this for images, for instance, we also have to deal with the quantitative information that is in the image. And what we did is to find something halfway between them, using logics and spatial logics, and using also the spatial information in images represented as fuzzy sets, and also spatial relations represented as fuzzy sets. So the interest of this is to be able to model both quantitative and symbolic information in the same framework, and also to deal with the imprecision that is inherent to the images and also to the knowledge we have about these images. So this imprecision can concern the objects we have to recognize, the spatial representation. So for instance, directional representation are intrinsically imprecise. So for instance, if I say that this here is for you, it's on the right of the computer, for instance. If it's here, you will say, so okay, it's on the right. But if I move like this, so you will say, so it's still on the right, but maybe to a less extent. And at some point, you will say, no, it's no more on the right. So instead of having something saying it's on the right or not, we prefer to have something gradual. So degree of satisfaction of the relation, and then fuzzy sets are well appropriated for that. So to start with, we have to find a model of spatial entities. So how can we represent spatial entities? So in particular extracted from images. So we have a lot of different possibilities. We can represent the region as we extracted here it from the images. So it might be complex, but we have all information. Or we may want to reduce it to a few key points, for instance. So here on this example, the structure here in black is a lateral ventricles, which is the dark structure here in the middle of the brain. And so we can decide to represent it only by a center of gravity, so the red point, by a bounding box, or by a few key points, for instance, or keep the whole region. And of course, if we reduce the representation to a few points, we don't have a complete representation of the shape, and when the shape is complex like here, it might be a problem, but it will be easier to handle in some reasoning process. On the other hand, regions can also be represented in a fuzzy way in order to represent the fuzziness we may have on the boundary of the objects, for instance, taking into account the fact that the segmentation is maybe not perfect. And we may also have some purely abstract representation, as is done, for instance, in mirror topology, so where spatial entities are represented as abstract concepts, so without referring even to points in the spatial domain. Then we can move to spatial relations. So their usefulness is known from a long time ago. So it was highlighted, for instance, by Freeman or Kuipers in the 70s, so it's really a long time ago, but without any formal representation of the spatial relations. And the idea is that they bring some structural information, which is usually more stable than shape information, for instance, or appearance information. So, for instance, I mentioned before the anatomical variability from one individual to another one. So that means that the shape of an anatomical structure can change a little bit from one person to another one, and even more in case of pathologies. The appearance in images can change also, but the fact that a structure is on the right of another one, this is more stable. In particular, if we model this type of information using fuzzy sets. And so that's an important information to take into account. And now we can distinguish between different types of spatial relations. So for instance, are there binary relations, or only between two structures, or are there n-ary relations? So for instance, a between relation involves at least a three structure. And some relations are quite simple. It's like topological relation, for instance, or intersection, inclusion, adjacency, etc. And other ones are more complex and maybe fuzzy. So for an example of a complex relation is illustrated here. This is an aerial image. And we have here extracted a set of houses from this image. And now we want to find the houses that are aligned. And so that means that we have to find a group of objects. We don't know the cardinality of this group. And they have to satisfy some relation of alignment, which is also interestingly vague. So this is the result here. And we can see that we have two groups, one with blue houses where there are given some number of objects, and here less objects in the red groups. Another example of complex relation is a parallelism. So for instance, is this group, the blue group, parallel to the red group? This is another question we may ask. So now, in order to do all this, we will rely in the mathematical formalism of lattices, and in particular complex, complete lattices. And this is actually a core structure we can find in many, many domains on information processing. So I listed a few here. And a complete lattice is a space endowed with a partial relation, where we can define a supremum and an infimum for any family of elements of the space. And so this is very, very useful. So there are many, many examples of such complete lattices. So for instance, if we take a set, so the set of all subsets of this set endowed with the inclusion relationship is a complete lattice, for instance. So this is a very simple example. And we can build such lattices on sets, on fuzzy sets, on functions, on graphs, on logical formulas, so on many, many types of structures. So that's why we have many domains where this mathematical structure is very at the core of the modeling. And what I did is to define mathematical morphology on these different types of lattices, because mathematical morphology is a good way to handle in an algebraic way spatial information, and in particular it's very convenient to model spatial relations. I will show you this in a moment. So I don't know if you are familiar with mathematical morphology, but the main idea is to define a complete lattice. And then so algebraic structure with a partial ordering. And then we define two basic operators, which are called dilation and erosion. And dilation is simply defined as an operation that commutes with the supremum of the lattice, and erosion is an operation that commutes with the infimum of the lattice. So these are still quite abstract definitions, so we don't have any concrete meaning of that. But from this we can have a lot of properties, in particular related to the adjunction property between these two operations, from which we can derive a lot of nice algebraic properties which are really useful in practice. Now, so this is general enough to be applied in any lattice. And now if we want to come up with concrete operations that can be applied in the spatial domain in particular, what is often done is to use particular forms of these operations using a particular set which is called structuring element. So this is an element of the lattice, basically. So let's consider the lattice of the power set of some domain S, for instance. We define a structuring element which is denoted by B in this expression, and then the dilation can be expressed very simply as a set of points of space where the structuring element translated at this point intersects the objects that are present in the space. And erosion is defined in a similar way, but this time we impose an inclusion relation between the translated structuring element and the objects. So that's the very simplest form on sets, but of course we can define a similar operation on other structures than set, and more complex ones. So this is an example here. We have a binary image, so typically subsets of the two-dimensional spatial domain. The structuring element is here, and this is the result of dilation and of erosion. So you can see what is called dilation and erosion, because the dilation has the effect of increasing the object, basically, and the erosion reduces the objects. And now, if we want to use this in fuzzy sets, so just to recall what is a fuzzy set, so it is simply a set where the membership function of each element to the set is not just 0 and 1, but it can take a number of values. So typically any values in 0, 1. Of course, we can choose something else than 0, 1. Okay, and this is denoted by a function which is the equivalent of the characteristic function, which is called here membership function. And this function applied to an element x describes the degree to which x belongs to the fuzzy set. So it's a membership degree. And it's something completely deterministic, and it represents imprecision and vagueness, but not stochastic uncertainty or something like that. And now we can define an algebraic structure on fuzzy sets. So again, we can define a complete lattice on these fuzzy sets, and we'll have a number of operations that generalize set theoretical operations to these fuzzy sets. And the way we are using it is to consider as under ground space the image domain and define fuzzy sets on this domain, which represent approximately defined objects, for instance. And we use it also to define spatial relations. So the way we can model spatial relation is to consider that, for instance, given a reference object, if we want to know the region of space where a given relation is satisfied to this object, this can be conveniently represented as a fuzzy set. So that means that for each point of space, the membership degree will represent the degree to which at the spatial relation we are considered is satisfied at this point with respect to the reference object. So this is an example of what we can do. And we did so for a number of relations, so I won't detail all of them, but typically there are topological relations, relative directions, distances, relations such as between, parallel, along, aligned, etc. So there are many relations we can define in this way. And I will use just an example showing why it's interesting to use mathematical morphology to do that. For instance, imagine we have a reference object, so here's a red square, and we want to know the region of space which is on the right of this square. So this is typically a vague information, and we can represent this vagueness as a fuzzy structuring element, so which is here. So here the reference is just the central point, and we have membership degrees which are represented here as gray levels. So for instance, white areas corresponds to points which satisfy the relation to a high degree, so which are well to the right of the point here, and then the degree decreases when we move apart away from the horizontal direction. So for one point, it's quite easy to design such a structuring element. Now the question is how to use this to define the spatial relation to any object, so not just to one point. And dilation is very useful to do that. And we have shown that we can just dilate the reference object by this structuring element in order to define the region of space where to the right of the object. And again, we have here a region which is well to the right with a high degree, and this degree decreases when we move a part of this direction. And this applies for any reference object, for instance, and in any dimension. So I use it in 3D, for instance. And the only thing we have to do is to define this structuring element, which provides the semantic of the relation. And this is a way we found to solve the semantic gap issues I mentioned before. So this tells us what does it mean to be to the right in a particular context. We can do the same for other relations. So for instance, here it's a relation close to the square. And again, we can define with the structuring element what is the semantic of the relation close to. And of course, it will depend on the context. So close to doesn't mean the same if we say that two anatomical structures are close to each other in the brain, or if two persons in this room are close to each other. So this is not the same meaning, of course. And what is interesting also with fuzzy sets is that we can incorporate a lot of different representations. So we can model spatial relations as a number, as a fuzzy number, as an interval, as a distribution, as whatever the representation. Everything can be modeled within the same framework of fuzzy sets. So I don't have time to detail this, but it's important to see. So now we can move to reasoning, and what we will have for reasoning is some concepts. So we have concepts defining objects, defining relations, etc. And then we want to reason on that. So we are going to represent these concepts in some formal structures, some mathematical structures. So, for instance, graphs, conceptual graphs, etc. And then use some reasoning methods to infer some information from the image. So I will give a few examples in the last part of the talk. For instance, for brain imaging. So we have a description of the brain, so that is given by neuroanatomists or extracted from medical ontologies or from textbooks that describes the brain, the different parts of the brain, and eventually some pathologies. And it's interesting to see that such description involves a lot spatial relations. So, for instance, the left caudate nucleus is inside the left hemisphere, for instance, so which is a topological relation, is close to the lateral ventricle, so it's a distance relation. It's on the left of the left lateral ventricle, so it's a directional information, etc. So we have a lot of such knowledge that we want to model. So that's the general scheme we are using. So we have this knowledge, so coming from different types of source, and then we represent this knowledge, for instance, as a graph. So for instance, in this graph, each node of the graphs represents a particular anatomical structures, and we have relationships between these structures. So for instance, the caudate nucleus is near the lateral ventricle and to the right, in the right hemisphere of the right lateral ventricle, for instance. So these relationships are carried by the edges on the graph, and of course they depend on some parameters. So defining these structuring elements I've shown you before, and these parameters can be learned from an annotated database. We don't need few data to do that because it can be approximated sufficient. And now we have an image we want to interpret with the help of this graph. So we develop different methods to do that. One is graph matching. So for instance, we can segment this image and try to find the best homomorphism between the model graph and the graph extracted from the image, which is not an easy task, actually. Or we can use the graph in order to drive in a sequential way the segmentation process and the recognition. So we will do both at the same time in this case. Or we can use this graph as a constraint network and consider the problem as a CSP problem, so a constraint satisfaction problem. So I will show you two examples. One is a sequential method. So we have the model graph, and we will segment and recognize at the same time each structure after the other. So we start with structures, and then we look in the graph. So for instance, if we have already segmented the structure here, we can look in the graph which are the structures that are adjacent in the graph. So for instance, here we have the choice between 2 and 4, and we can choose the one that is the easiest to segment. So this is based on some on the regions that are defined from the spatial relation and from saliency extracted from the image. So I won't detail this. So we segment these structures, and then we move on to the next one. So this is a sequential process, and the sequence of structure can be learned for each image separately. And of course, we can also have some backtracking in case of errors. So I won't detail this, but this avoids classical problem with sequential methods. So, if we are wrong at some point, we don't want to continue. So we are backtracking in order to correct the path we followed. And these are a few examples of where we have both the segmentation and the recognition done together. The recognition here is represented just by a color, so each color means a particular structure. And we can see that it works well, so here for the internal brain structure, even in case of pathology, so for instance here structures that are an unexpected shape, or in the case of pathology here, that deforms a lot the normal structures. Another example of using this approach is for the recognition of white matter fiber bundles. So these fiber bundles can be extracted by a tractography algorithm from diffusion MRI data, for instance. And then we are trying to extract from a huge number of fibers the ones that correspond to specific bundles. And again, for this, we rely on anatomical descriptions. So saying, for instance, that this bundle is in front of the thalamus, for instance, etc. So we use, again, these types of definition. So this is an example showing the region in front of the thalamus. And we have here the recognition of two different bundles. So this is called insensate fasciculus, which is basically responsible for the memory of names of person, etc. So I think for me it's not well functioning, this one. And this is IFOF here. It's another bundle that is recognized using this approach. Another approach we developed is considering the graph as a constraint network. So basically, we want to find a solution, which is a set of regions in the image that satisfies this set of constraints. And this can be done by propagating a constraint, as usually done in CSP methods. And here, because we have a huge space of solution, we represent the space of solution for each object by an interval. So at the beginning, we have as an interval an empty image for the lower bound and the whole space for the upper bound. And we try to reduce progressively the bounds of this interval in order to focus more and more on the structure we have. And this is done by applying successively all constraints to reduce these bounds. And finally, at the end, we have so this is small here, but you can see that, for instance, for one here for the left ventricle, for instance, we have a lower bound and a upper bound, which are really close together, and then it's very easy to segment the object in the image within these two bounds. So this is another approach to solve the problem, and here are a few results on one slide here and in 3D. So for the sequential methods that I mentioned before, it works very well in 3D. For this one, it takes a lot of time in 3D, but it works, but it takes a lot of time. So this was another example in aerial image, but I will skip this. I will still keep the medical domain. So this is another example on pelvic images. So this is a project that is still ongoing that we have with Necker Hospital. And in this project, we are working not only with radiologists, but also with surgeons that need to have, for instance, for surgery in pediatrics and here for the pelvis, they need to have precise information about the nerves, because of course during the surgery they don't want to cut a nerve that would have a bad consequence for the child. And again, we use the tractography methods to have these nerves and to recognize them again using anatomical descriptions, as we did for the brain. So this is still ongoing work, but it works quite quite well. So here we have an example of a few nerve bundles that have been recognized using their anatomical description. Now, if we want to have more abstract representation, we can work with logics. And we define with some colleagues what we call the morphologics, which is mathematical morphology applied to logics. And basically, the idea is very simple. So, for instance, consider propositional logic. We can define, for instance, the models of formulas and consider them as a set. And we have an equivalence between the inclusion on sets and implication, for instance, on logics. And so we have, we can build, as we did for sets, we can build lattice structures on the set of formulas. And these structures are homomorphic up to the syntactic equivalence on formulas. And then we can define dilation and erosion as we did on any lattice. And what is interesting is that we can order the models of our formula according to, for instance, erosion and dilation of the formula. So this is illustrated here. So let's imagine, for instance, that we have here, denoted by sigma, the set of models of a formula. We can order all models, all possible models of the language using successive erosion and successive dilation. And then we can define a partial ordering on all the models of the formula. So for instance, we can say that according to this order, X is smaller than Y, which is smaller than Z, for instance. And then, based on this ordering, we can perform usual tasks of symbolic AI, such as revision, fusion, or merging, or abduction, mediation, etc., using simple morphological tools. And this can be extended to other types of logics, like model logics. We use also description logics in order to deal with ontologies representing spatial relations, and more general formalisms such as satisfaction systems or institutions. So everything works well, and now we can do some spatial reasoning based on this. I won't detail this, just one example. So again, a brain example. And the idea here was to model the image understanding problem as an abduction problem. So we have some knowledge expressed here in description logics in this example, and we have an observation, which is the image. And now we try to infer the best explanation here that entails the observation according to the knowledge we have. And this can be done using erosion, basically, in the knowledge base. So this is the knowledge we have expressed in description logics. So we, for instance, we describe, for instance, a brain hemisphere as a particular brain structure, etc. So we have a lot of description of the anatomy expressed here in description logics. And this can be represented graphically as this, so it's quite complex. And to do that, we move to formal concept analysis in order to have this graphical representation, which is a complete lattice again. And now we have the observation, which comes from preliminary image analysis tools, which describe what we have, so a tumor, some characteristic of the tumor, and some relationship we can compute between structures, as I've shown before. And now, in order to reason on that, we transform this observation in a concept, and we choose the most specific concept. And then we can express the interpretation problem as a concept adduction problem, so which is expressed here. So we will find an explanation gamma, which explains the concept. And using erosion in the lattice I've shown before, we can come up with the best explanation, which is a higher level explanation, not directly extracted from the basic description we had from the segmentation, and which uses the knowledge we have. So I will skip this and just show a few examples of what we are trying to do now. So what we are trying to do now is to merge this symbolic representation with deep learning, basically. And the idea is to try to introduce knowledge in deep learning in order to have more explainable results and also more explainable methods within the deep learning. So basically what I've shown before using abduction is typically the search for an explanation. So it's already explainable AI. Yeah. So now we are trying to do similar things with deep learning methods. So it's a very preliminary work, and I will show you just a few results. So here it's still on the pelvic example I've shown before. So results on the segmentation of blood vessels, which are based on a deep learning approach and a geometrical model of the vessels. And in order to deal with the fact that we have very few data, so these are pediatric images, so there are not so many, we use the patches extracted from the image, and using successive patches introduce some of the 3D information. And the idea here is to use a geometric model as typically a tree of vessels, and to do jointly segmentation and classification into artery and veins, which works quite well. Another example is a transfer learning approach where it was an application for neonates, for newborns. So here again, we don't have so many images. So we used pre-trained neural networks on anything else, so not brain images. And then we just applied some transfer learning to modify the networks. And so there is a small modification in the architecture of the networks and also tuning of some of the parameters. And again, we used 3 successive slices to have a spatial consistency in the result. And what is interesting here is that with very few new data, so you can see here the number of new training data we had for the transfer. So this is very few. We could achieve very good results in a few seconds. So it's very rapid. And this is another example where this time it was also transfer learning, but the idea was to use existing database on adult images to segment the corpus callosum. So this structure here, so it's not really visible here. And then transfer to children. Okay? So again, we had a lot of adult images, very few children images. And we used transfer learning, so using basically fine-tuning and a little bit of geometry added to the UNet architecture. And we have here some results. So these are the segmentation results. And what was interesting here is that we had images of patients at different times. And so we can draw, for instance, the thickness profile. So along the corpus callosum here, so we compute the thickness at different positions, which is represented here on this axis, and we can draw these curves for all images. And this is what is important for the medical expert to see that some regions are quite stable, but in some regions the thickness changes a lot, because this can have some cognitive consequences for the children. And actually it was a question, should we train the network to provide these thickness values, or should we go through the segmentation? And I think that if we want to make the results acceptable by the medical experts and explainable in some way, it's important to provide also the segmentation. Because if they see something strange in the thickness, for instance, they can look at the segmentation and say, so actually the segmentation was wrong, or the segmentation is correct, and there is actually a problem with the thickness. So it's important to have both in order to gain in explainability and then also in acceptability by the user. So that's my point of view. And the last example, which was also a transfer learning approach with, from adults to children on ultrasound images. And here what was used is to have a model of the geometrical change between the anatomical structure during the growth of the children. So to model the geometrical deformation, basically, between children and adults. So we had a model of this deformation, and parameters of this model were learned, of course, again using a neural network, and then incorporated in the segmentation network. So that's the last example I wanted to show. So thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle, for this presentation. I think it's really interesting to see how the knowledge could be represented and also mixed with machine learning and transfer learning and yes, but it's a very promising area, I think. So, questions?
Very interesting talk. So I was very interested about the part that you use a graph-based way to modeling the image. So you have basically two graphs, right? One graph is come from basically from the knowledge, that formal knowledge from topology. And at the same time, you also construct a graph from the image itself, right? And then do matching.
It depends on the method, actually. The methods that were the most powerful were the one where we had only one graph, which is a model, and which drives the recognition of the image. But we do not extract any graph from the image. We use the graph as a guide for the knowledge for the image interpretation. So we had only one graph, actually. For the CSP-based method or the sequential approach, we had only one graph, which was a model graph.
Oh, I see. So you only construct graph from the knowledge graph itself. So, but I remember in the part that you said that you also have a matching so that you can find.
Yes, that's an approach we tried to have a segmentation of the image, build a graph from this, and then try to match the model graph and the image graph. But it was really difficult. We could not have an isomorphism between the two graphs because segmentation was too difficult. So we had to look for only a homomorphism between the two graphs. And of course, there are many. So we had to find an objective function which defines what is the best match. And it was actually quite difficult to find the objective function that is actually optimal for the best for the solution. And so we didn't continue to work in that direction, and we decided to have only one graph and try to drive the image understanding from this graph.
Oh, thank you. That's actually my question. You already answered my question. Other thing that I was thinking, so since you can construct either subgraph from the logic graph or from the image itself, so if it's hard to find the correspondence between the data graph and the subgraph from the logic graph, why not only consider, for example, you can do the matching from the data itself, or do the matching from the subgraph in the logic graph itself, so that you can separate. You can have
there are methods working like this, for instance, based on atlases, which are kind of images, which are a model of what is expected. But we are dealing with children images which are evolving rapidly in time, so atlases are very limited for that. And in case of pathologies, the atlas can be quite far from what we have actually in the image, and then the matching is not functioning very well. But of course, this is another type of approach.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Many questions. Okay, just in your approach, there are two essential tools. One is the fact that you have this nice correspondence between high-level logic and morphologic. So you are able to make reasoning in a nice way using nice operators. This is a bit second part of your talk. And there is the first thing, which is you have images, you have spatial relation. It's very important object in your images, and you use this morphological Morphomat and as you said. So my question is, have you tried, or some other groups have tried your approaches on other kind of data? So maybe first of all, also images, not medical images, where maybe you are in good condition, if I can say, meaning that you have textbook, you have knowledge, it's high level expertise, but maybe to understand scene on the road, in the street, for instance.
Yes, some other group did so. We did not work on chest image, but some other group did so. And what we did is to work on IRL images. So that's the example I skipped because I was short on time. And actually we used the CSP-based approach on IRL images, and it was a little bit more complicated actually than on medical images because of the we do not have knowledge of how many types of the same object could be there. For instance, we worked on harbor or airport, so we know that there will be boats, but we don't know how many. And so we had to change to adapt to deal with groups of objects where we don't know a priori what will be the cardinality of the group. So that there are some additional difficulties, but we can do that. And for the logic-based approach, we worked also on completely different problems, not images. So for instance, for modeling preferences, and see how we can use these tools to revise preferences, to merge preferences from different groups, for instance, or to find some kind of mediated solution between different groups, and to do also abduction, but not on images, but on preferences or things like that. So not image application.
Okay, and more generally, if the last methods you saw, I mean, if you show, if we consider that it's a way to make explainable deep learning, have you worked on? Have you tried to compare your work on now for 2 years we have seen some methods about explainability using saliency maps, things like that.
Yes, we are working on that. Yeah,
you're very
mostly in medical imaging, but we have results on so saliency map and also deep dreams approaches. So we have nice results and to express which are the features that are the networks is really robust on or insensitive and things like this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. A quick question: how hard is it to create the knowledge maps that you showed, and how do you deal when maybe when the graph gets too large, some things make it that it's not the lattice anymore? Is it possible to deal with that, or how large can a knowledge graph go?
In the example I have shown, the knowledge graph was done by hand, but there are also methods to build such knowledge. For instance, to such graphs, for instance, extracted from ontologies or using semantic web approaches, etc. But we didn't work on that. And how large it can be, this is a matter of complexity, and so I don't know. Actually, we didn't check, and so I already have a lot of problems of time, so I don't. I didn't look so precisely at this. Time to lunch.
No, I have one question. And I have one question on here you work on image and not on video, okay? But do you know approaches that try to make this spatial reasoning and temporal reasoning
at the same time?
Yeah.
Yes. So, for instance, there are also some tools, for instance, in mirror topology, where you can add time information. So, for instance, combining RCC-based reasoning and Allen's intervals, for instance, for qualitative spatiotemporal reasoning. And what we did was more in a quantitative way, so use the types of approach we had in each frame, and then impose some temporal consistency from one frame to the second one, using some tracking approach, etc. So the time information in what we did was incorporate rather using classical methods. And
and in order to go further, in terms of multimodality, you could maybe try to encode knowledge of links between
yes, so something we are using when we have multimodal images. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.